Welcome back. So hope you enjoyed the lunch. At the end of the lunch, some of the scholars were able to meet the board members. So thank you for that as well. We have a new board with a great team of working group chairs with lots of ideas. And I was happy to see that lots of plans are being developed and synergies. We're now back. Hope you maybe had a coffee, some sugar. We're going for the afternoon session. And this topic is something that we're proposing as part of the documentation discussion. Artificial intelligence, what is that? In my other life, in my other job, I'm a teacher. And so in universities, everything is about ChatGPT. And PDF, there's the other one on PDF, and there's another one, there's a million. When we ask students to make homework, they figure out how, with the tools available online, they can return for as little effort, the best grade. So we're having to redesign our examination methods, but most importantly, we're rethinking, what do we want students to learn? We say, read this document, make a summary, and we hope that then they learn. But in fact, when they feed this to ChatGPT, we don't get that learning. So what do we want them to learn? We're redefining, we're rediscussing and reinventing. I find it a quite refreshing exercise. And I thought, hey, maybe we can do that here as well, because with the digital technologies, museums are having to reconsider their position with their audiences, within their internal workflows, and also, across their peers. And so we decided to have a chat about it out in the open. We haven't rehearsed anything. And so let's see what comes out. Jonathan has started with setting up the introduction, the context, so that we sort of start from a same steps, and then we'll continue with a first response from Dominic, and I'll continue with that response, and I have some questions that I will ask everybody and us that we can reflect on, and we'll see where we go. Jonathan.
Hello, can you hear me? Yeah, I can hear myself. So I couldn't sleep last night, and so I wrote something, which is what happens when you feel underprepared, or when you're about to approach a topic like this. The issue is hot, it's fraught, and it's in transition. And I am not an AI expert, freely admittedly, but I think this discussion is something we're overdue in having in our field in general. I want to maybe say a couple of broad things before bringing us back into the reality of museum documentation, dovetailing into some of what Dominic has discussed or is interested in. So as I see it, much of the recent criticisms regarding AI, both in media and also in scholarly channels, tend to revolve around two subjects which often overlap. The first is power. It's been well documented that artificial intelligence has been created primarily by 6 or 7 companies in the West. These companies guard their technology. It is in no way open source. And of course, these companies are for profit, and it should be no surprise to anyone that if these companies are spending billions to develop these technologies, they naturally would expect to make many billions in return, regardless of any altruistic ideals or knowledge breakthroughs. So there's been criticism at every level here. Criticism that there's a Western hegemony at work when it comes to this technology, a technology that we are frequently told is inevitable, thus causing knee-jerk or innate backlash. Criticism that the drive for profit gears decisions rather than anything related to the public good. Criticism in studies showing that the amount of training data used for the largest AI models like ChatGPT have a gigantic carbon footprint, are part of the world of global exploitation of rare earth materials and a footprint that is also undisclosed. And of course, a revised version of that old criticism, or better yet, fear, that humans will be replaced by robots. Although I personally find Kate Crawford's thoughts more compelling on that particular issue, that we shouldn't be afraid that robots will take over our jobs. We should be worried that humans will be treated like robots. And the second broad criticism we read about seemingly every day in major news outlets revolves around the quality of information AI applications produce. Again, the flurry of concern around these applications largely has to do with the public unveilings of the more recent large-scale applications like chatbots. So much so that any newsreader now knows what training data is. And with the advent of these applications going mainstream, there's now scrutiny and criticism about two overlapping sub-issues. Accuracy. It's been demonstrated even by Dominic in his keynote that ChatGPT and various other applications return incorrect, out of date, or wholly made up information when often asked questions. And bias. It's been demonstrated that results from these services are biased in a myriad of ways, with all manner of results displaying everything from cultural insensitivities to sexism, to simply displaying what a user wants to see, again prompting further cries of technorati hegemony. It's been shown that the size of training data does not guarantee diversity. 15% of Wikipedians are women. 64% of Reddit users are young men. This has affected results. These realizations, of course, shocked many people, and it's prompted political hand-wringing as well as serious backlash against the tech industry and created a wariness and fear surrounding the entire idea of AI in general. You likely read that the New York Times will not allow its data to be used as training data. I believe Reddit has recently stated the same. There are a number of related lawsuits already underway, and the EU's major initiative to regulate AI technology is probably just the start of a series of complicated battles, legal, financial, cultural, that will dominate discussion for years. But of course, we, in the world of documentation, already understand two things. First, you're only as good as the quality of your metadata, and those that produce, encode, and otherwise create cultural heritage metadata, whether for data content or data structure or data exchange, are often ignored or underutilized. And second, we're likely already understand that AI is all around us and has been in use for years under the terms machine learning and computer vision. Perhaps not as in your face as ChatGPT, but we've been heading in this direction for quite some time. And in terms of hegemony, the entire idea of the cloud that us regular people use at work and on our phones every day is in fact a virtual space owned by those very same hegemonic structures, Amazon, Google. So we're already embedded in these technologies, whether we like it or not. But some good news. One of the positive things about those who work in museum and library documentation is that they are part of a community, a very active, open community that, of course, has its problems and differences and sometimes major dysfunctions, but a community nonetheless, and one that tends to share information rather than lock it up. Museums and libraries, as messy as they can be, tend to think in terms of increasing access and not limiting it. Thus, due to our understanding of this information landscape, we are in a better position to actuate change in AI information retrieval, in a better position perhaps to develop applications related to our work that might then be reflected in a broader AI application, in a better position to understand the elasticity of data content and build that into data structures. Artificial intelligence, after all, is comprised of work by human beings somewhere. That said, when the museum presidents and CFOs of the world hear the word metadata, they're asleep already. As Dominic alluded to, budgets for metadata expansion, especially related to new content produced by scholars and experts, are usually not prioritized. I would love to think that the front page inaccuracies of something like ChatGPT will bring about a new scrutiny, a renaissance, a flowering of brilliant, diverse, and abundantly useful data across platforms and structures. But the realist in me says that we may have to work with what we got, as the saying goes. The good news is that we at least have the ability and the community to do so. Apologies, I wrote that late at night. So if
that's really good.
so I was just thinking that was just a broad preamble, really.
So that was a really good introduction. I think heard a better one. But obviously discussions are going on about this all over the place. Almost every meeting that I've gone to or symposium has got a section now on AI. It's worth saying something a little bit about how we're using AI in heritage. So a little known fact that CIDOC CRM is based on AI. So it's based on something called knowledge representation. And this is a branch of AI. And it's a branch of AI that was aimed at not allowing computers to just go off and look at tons and tons of material and then work stuff out for themselves. It was a branch of AI that said that we should actually have a responsibility for teaching computers our knowledge systems within particular domains so that they could actually make more accurate inferences and reasoning. And that is where knowledge representation comes from, which is the basis, one of the bases for CIDOC CRM. And it's about providing ontological, empirically based frameworks that make sure that the computer understands, as far as they do, what they're talking about. So we already have an element of that, but it's a different path to the one that is being used in ChatGPT. There's also, therefore, lots of opportunities for us in cultural heritage if we can get it right. You saw in the presentation that I was using ChatGPT to show bias and inaccuracies and issues that it hoovered up from all of those stores across the internet. And unfortunately, we were making some of the same mistakes ourselves in our data. And that should point to us as a potential opportunity because there is a value on having accurate data. And if we can't do that, then we are looking at perhaps a difficult time ahead. The other aspect of it is that you have noticed that ChatGPT doesn't give any provenance of the information that it's giving out. So this is another fantastic opportunity for us. So I'm a historian, and traditionally scholars have said that, especially historians, they go off to libraries and archives, and they write in their books, and they write all of their notes down in their sort of commonplace book, whatever. There's one historian that then cuts them into little snippets and puts them into categorized envelopes, and then does this for about a year. And then after he says, right, I can write my book, and he empties the envelopes out onto a big dining table, and he spreads them out into patterns from which he can necessitate interpretations and conclusions. Yeah, and then those go into the rhetoric of the book. But the process of those arrangements of data and the information that's being interpreted and thought about is never recorded. They go in the bin afterwards, right? So this is really crucial process information that is important for underpinning the type of work that historian does. And I would argue that it's exactly the same here. If we're not producing that type of evidential type information, then again, we're going to be susceptible to stuff like AI. So it's a little bit about, it is again about quality, as Jonathan was saying. And we haven't got the provenance in the work that we're doing, and we haven't got the quality to actually provide an alternative to this stuff. We cannot say we are better than ChatGPT. We've got all the same biases, all the same inaccuracies, and we haven't paid attention to this. But perhaps this is an argument where if you're not into AI and you don't think it's going to progress much, that we can, one, produce something better, but two, we can actually teach computers, if we are into AI, to have more accurate results than those that are derived from just simply hoovering up stuff from the internet. So that's I guess that's a sort of alternative view in terms of the context of museums.
Mm-hmm. I propose we each one, I'll say something that I'm thinking about regarding not only ChatGPT, regarding the AI thing. And then I'd like to hear if there's questions or if there's perspectives from the audience that we can engage in a dialogue. So I was just in a meeting last week in Stuttgart, and there was an artist, Regina Silveira, the Brazilians in the room. You know her? She's amazing. So she has this art piece where she puts things from keys, a piece of cloth, piece of paper like that, and places on the table and moves it. And the machine captures the image and interprets it based on the information it has been fed. The machine has been fed. Everything you see is a beautiful sea landscape. And so when the machine sees the keys or a pencil, it creates this gorgeous Pasaje del Mar, and seascape. And the same with fire, the same with flowers. And so the machine, the algorithm, is taught, what should you see? And this artist confronts the viewer with, are we the same? We learn from our perspective, and we might not be able to see the world from a different perspective. Another question was in the meeting in Stuttgart, what's creativity? In creativity, we think, as humans, like now, we get ideas from everywhere, we process them, and we come up with new things. Machines do that too now. So they take a bunch of images and they put the Pope in a white coat. I guess that was really popular. I missed it, so I had learned about it. Is that creativity or not? And there's a number of questions that come up. Going back to, just one more point. ChatGPT allowed for the democratization of access to some of these ideas. It used to be that I was the only one in my office that knew a little bit about this topic. And my background is in the arts and in economics. So nothing to do with this. And somehow now everybody knows a little bit about, there's algorithms, there's machine learning, there's deep learning. Maybe they don't know exactly how it works, but they know the machines are intelligent. And whenever we come up with robots will take over our jobs and the world, I keep saying, close the door. They still don't know how to turn the knob and open the door. So machines are still quite dependent on us to open the door. Exactly. So with this, example of the artist showing us what we want to see, with this notion that we are being challenged to what is our contribution really, and with this notion that now everybody can be a creator, at a higher level, or a robotic level. Where are we at with museums? We were discussing what we might do with museums and artificial intelligence. And there were a few examples. One will be not necessarily in this perspective on knowledge representation, because this is a side of information science that's relatively underrepresented. There's more attention into what machines can do. And so one is to approach it from taking your data and see what it gives you, meaning support identification of objects based on the image, support provision of keywords based on some of the metadata, and fun. Another proposition is to include data from outside your data set to make predictions. We know that this material has such decay. We can cross it with your data set and see what kind of conservation measures could be done. And, million examples. However, the question is, what do we want it to do? Generally, museums, or let's say other way around, investment in museums goes to the very visible exhibitions. And very much so, because that's what museums do. They gather, they advance knowledge, and they present it to continue the conversation with the communities. Fair. However, there's a lot of, it's like the cherry on the pie. There's a lot of work behind it. And I will argue that documentation is a first step. Google's reading, Wikipedia are very much fed by the work of museum, libraries, and archive documentalists. And so I would like to explore in this conversation, how can we take that back? How can we take this, hey, documentalists, this is ours, let's do something with it. Do we have a microphone? Yeah. Do we have a hand?
Does anybody sort of start?
I like the uncomfortable silence.
Oh, I see.
They're not jumping into this snake pit.
You had a question.
I know. I was just gonna say, do people feel threatened by it? I mean, we've sort of looked at some of the issues with it, and it's obviously not a perfect technology. But I know that in lots of companies, they're looking at it to do various jobs, mostly administrative. For example, synthesis of documents, summarizing, stuff like that. I just wondered whether people here are starting to feel perhaps threatened by it. So, for example, one of the things that I didn't show in the presentation was me just asking ChatGPT to give me a description of an object that has an identifier in the Metropolitan Museum, and see what it came up with. And of course, what it's going to do, it's going to, if it can, trawl the Metropolitan Museum site, but it's also going to trawl all other sources that it can use to actually, if it can identify that object, and potentially it's going to give you a better record than the one that the Met gives you. So given that, how do people feel potentially about the ability for these machines to actually give better documentation than we do?
Okay, there was a problem.
So thanks for the prompt. I think there's some interesting things to explore here. I'll offer a particular topic. I don't know if it's the right one, but to your point, Dominic, what can people do with it, and how threatening is it? At least in a very straightforward way, I think it can be seen as a tool. Something like ChatGPT can be quite useful. For example, maybe a trivial example, but if you're a technologist like me and you need to do something with code, like write a regular expression, which is notoriously difficult to keep in your brain, asking ChatGPT to write a regular expression for you to parse data in a particular way or validate data in a particular way can be a real time saver. So that's one member of the spectrum. As museum people, and especially people who have to transfer knowledge to the public, we think about stories, and writing stories is a difficult thing. And writing stories from a blank piece of paper, at least my own experience, is an extremely difficult thing. But having a starting point that might be imperfect, but gets me to be more productive, is, I think, a role for for something like an AI. Now, I think you can give it too much latitude. You can trust it with, you can overly trust it. That's a problem. But we need to learn how to, I mean, just as a society, I think we need to learn how to be better at questioning information that's presented to us, whether it's from ChatGPT or a so-called media source, trusted or otherwise. So that's my contribution to the conversation.
I think, sorry. Sorry, yeah, more people.
Hi, this is Maija Ekosari from Finland. I pretty much agree with the previous speaker, and I can talk a little bit about my own experiences using AI in general. I was embarrassed to raise my hand first because I walked in late, so I didn't know what Jonathan and Dominic have been talking about. But if we are just going to discuss, a couple of years ago already, we were trying on how AI would recognize pictures. There was a group of people from museums with a couple of engineers, and we were studying how we would need to catalog, how we would need to document our pictures so that we could properly teach the AI to recognize some features, for example, in cultural historical objects. And we decided that it's quite a lot of work. We don't want to do that. But then we started looking at what the AI already can do. It might not be able to recognize right away, let's say, some cultural historical object that comes from remote Finnish village, but it can recognize if there are people in the picture or houses or cars or something like this. So rather than using it as a supreme brain, we decided that we could use it like a worker who does the rough work for us. So we have a bunch of digitized photographs which have no data, no metadata on them. So what it would help if AI would start recognizing if it is a city or countryside, nature, if there are people. And we noticed that it also recognizes places pretty well. And we used 2 years ago some freely available software. So we haven't retried it this year, but we are going to do it before Christmas and see if we get something more out of it. Thank you.
Image recognition software in the US has been probably the most politicized and complicated news story related to AI prior to the ChatGPT mania in the news, because I'm sure you have probably read some of the most famous articles on this by some of the Google engineers who determined the bias existing in the tool, and then of course were fired, and then went on to start their own foundations in some instances and became far more well known than they ever have been. But the article stochastic parrots is a way to investigate the problems therein, specifically related to bias in AI. It's not really related to museum documentation, but it's well worth knowing those issues. Yeah.
Yes, we are well aware of those issues, but if we use tags generated by AI, there is a tag generated by AI. So when you go back to the pictures later, you know.
I guess I'm Melissa. I work at the Getty. When I think about the broader, more general dystopian fear sense that you're talking about as well, part of what is on the horizon for me, or what I think about a lot, is making information like more proprietary. And so this idea of taking all of this documentation and this stuff that's been argued over for for years or decades, and in a sense has its own limitations as far as perspective and how things were acquired and provenance. And then that data is then being taken and synthesized by a machine for profit, essentially. Like, you can see the future of it costing something, or like having a paywall in front of it, or being like maybe the best source for some sort of information, but it's pulling from all these things that had investments in different levels, either from public monies or from people monies. So that's the part that I do fear, is this like further proprietarization, I don't think that's a word, of information, like general information.
I think there's one more. But I've got something. Yeah.
Hi, I have a couple of comments. One is that, this idea of being threatened by AI reminds me of the rise of the browsers and like Google, and how the information and knowledge workers were afraid that they would replace us, right? And it took us a long time to get on to like start exposing our data to the browsers. And so I'm hoping that we can react more swiftly about how we harness AI and use it for good means, rather than sitting back and feeling very, very threatened about it, and coming to the realization that it's not going away, and how we incorporate what we do into that space. And I just wanted to mention that the Smithsonian just put out a paper, I just got it in my inbox today, about developing responsible AI practices. And so I think that's going to be really important for the organizations across the world to be able to do, to look at how we use AI, where we use it and where we don't, and have a policy around that.
That's really great. I think we should all probably investigate that. And I completely agree also. And I'm rather agnostic on the entire subject. But I think it's good to know, we might be in this state of overcorrective fear, especially in the media and chat GPT may just be a flash in the pan, it's probably quite likely, and really we should probably be focusing on what we can do swiftly to work with it in a positive way and infect the tools that we will be using to actuate that potential change.
So I just wanted to make a comment on what was said before about starting points and augmentation of human intelligence and providing us with cognitive tools to be able to progress. That in the history of computers, there have been three traditions. One has been a sort of cataloging type of tradition where computers are used for storing information in an organized way. And then there's been the augmentation of human intelligence. This is sort of the stuff that was going on by the psychologists in America before the internet was created, and involved people like Engelbart, who invented the mouse and the Windows system and systems that allowed us to use computers in a better way. And then there is the computer scientists who, since Turing, have been trying to replace humans with computers. So these are the three traditions, and I suspect in the museum sector we're much more attuned to maybe the first one. We may use some tools in the second area of augmentation, and potentially we're under threat because we're in that first tier, especially in terms of documentation with the artificial intelligence. But the main thing is that the most of the money invested in research has gone to the third one. And very little money has gone to the first two, because those things so databases haven't changed for a long period of time. They still work in exactly the same way, more or less. Obviously, there are slight changes. And the way in which we use them hasn't changed. And that was the point I was trying to make in the keynote at the beginning. But very little money compared to trying to replace us has gone into more cognitive tools. And it's the cognitive tools that I find are potentially more interesting for us as knowledge workers, if you like, knowledge professionals, and tools work for developers where you can put in CIDOC CRM, you can actually get it to do CIDOC CRM for you and stuff like that. That seems to me like a very good tool, but we're not investing enough money into more cognitive tools to enhance our own judgment and interpretation, which is a key asset. Interpretation, judgment, and using our experience is a key skill that is being ignored by some of the big companies that Jonathan was talking about and investing in how they actually get rid of us.
Well, I'll wait to see another hand up. I'm sorry. Oh. Any next? Okay, we have a participant online, please. Can you check? What? Can I read? Hey, guess who's there? What can we as a community do to undermine the big tech hegemony? How do you say this? Hegemony. Can we create tools that meet our sector-specific needs, using our data to train them and making sure that they can be implemented on the kinds of infrastructures we can afford? I think it's a little bit what we've been talking about.
Yes.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah, I tell my students never make closed questions, because the answer is yes, move on. Why is the question, right? And some of the things, but I do want to go back to, and I'm sorry some of my colleagues are not here. There are several museums that are applying AI in their workflow precisely to lower staff cost. And this is something that, of course, we need, because museums have so little resource and there's so much to document in so many ways. But again, you get back to, wait a minute, we've been cleaning up our biases in our data set for so long. If we get these machines to create the labels for us for the exhibition, what will come out? You still need a person to review it to make sure that it's in line with your current thinking. Because everything you have to train the algorithm from your own data might not consider this timeline that in the past you used to think somehow, and now you have a different disposition or use of words, which is a little bit what you were talking about earlier. Yeah.
Just to follow on, in terms of being replaced. So computers, a little bit more history. Charles Babbage, who designed, or is considered the designer of the computer, one of his main achievements was actually employing division of labor in factories. So basically, he produced what he would call intelligent machines that would break up a particular skill into parts, which would mean that you wouldn't need the artisans' guilds anymore. And those separate jobs then wouldn't need the same amount of training, and therefore you could reduce your costs. So it was all about reduction of cost, and that tradition has been a core of computing ever since. So even today, there is now something called digital Taylorism, which is a sort of a digital version of scientific management, which was about dividing up into division of labor in order to reduce costs. Those things were never about efficiency or quality. They were always about reduction of costs. And there's a temptation, I suspect, with people who are doing this work to forego quality for reduction of cost. And that's what I think where we should be worried.
So that goes back, to my initial presentation as a teacher. What do we teach students? What do we want them to learn? In museums, it's the same. Like when we install this technology to help us, exactly for what? In the Netherlands, they've seen that it's not more effective to have the automatic check-in, checkouts, that you self-scan your things and pay. It's not that more efficient. They have a special line for people who want conversation. And so there's a person who will talk to you and engage while you're paying for your stuff. And I think these are the things that we cannot forget, that one thing is efficiency for lowering costs no matter what. And another thing is, what's our business? What are we doing? I strongly believe in knowledge creation and regeneration as a core function of the museum across generations, with the aid of whatever tools we might have at hand. You guys? Yes.
Both of you made me think of something that might be obvious, but I'll say it anyway, and that is the world is a very complicated place, and we only understand it through models. We only understand it through conceptual models, and our conceptual models are almost always wrong because they're incomplete. Like there's no such thing as a one-to-one scale model of the world. So part of knowledge generation is understanding when your model is wrong. And to do that, perhaps having an entity with a different bias to come in and provide some kind of new information is an opportunity for us to rethink and recheck our underlying models. Not because how else will you know if it's right or wrong? I mean, I'll tell you from straight up experience, if you get 4 archaeologists in a room and ask them to interpret a piece of archaeology, you'll get 4 different answers, and they're all partially right. So, I mean, kind of to your point, Dominic, this idea of building new knowledge is a tricky thing. And how do you even understand when you have achieved new knowledge? I mean, the ChatGPT by itself may or may not provide that, but how would you know?
But I think this is one area where I think we may be not all talking the same language. So I absolutely agree with this view that, and I think this is probably shared, that there are different angles, there are different ways of looking at something which are not necessarily all wrong, but are complementary, overlapping. There may be contradictions, and the contradictions is where we have to sort that out. And I think there's nothing wrong with having museum documentation, for example, that expresses different perspectives and different angles. And they need to be backed up by evidence and empirical evidence. But I think we're not in that game at the moment. We're not anywhere near that game. We provide quite linear, one-dimensional, flat records mostly, which are inaccurate and are not updated because we don't put the effort into it. Because the reason we don't put the effort into it is because our organizations don't see the value in the record, right? So there's this circular thing going on where museums have this responsibility to make this record. They don't see the value in them. They keep them to a minimal inventory record. They don't provide the resources to update them, so they become over time either inaccurate or, as I mentioned in my keynote, racist and sexist and biased in other ways. And really, in my mind, we should be getting to a point where we can have much more sophisticated discussions about different perspectives in structured data, and it has to be in textual narrative as well, but it has to be in structured data as well, because that's where a lot of the arguments are now happening in terms of these computer and information infrastructures. We need to be able to populate all these different areas, and we potentially have the knowledge to do that, although it's disappearing fast, right? Our curators are disappearing fast. The knowledge about our collections is disappearing fast, and we're left with these funny, records which are not even going to be of value to ChatGPT. So I do think that this is not understood by directors of these organizations. I don't think they understand any of these issues. The people probably that should be at this debate are probably them. And they should understand some of these issues. And what I would say, you all know that the British Museum objects went missing, and this in the news it was partly reported that this was a sort of not paying attention to the documentation of the collection. But actually, I think probably the news missed the bigger picture, that neglect of the of the collection system actually means a neglect of the knowledge around the collection as well. And I think this is a key point for that. It shows, you know, the physical disappearance shows that there was lack of attention maybe to these areas, but it shows a much bigger lack of attention to what I think is a much more important issue potentially is our building up of the knowledge around those objects. And that's what we're not doing very well. We keep on trying to simplify, condense, put into products our documentation when we should be reaching out with it, expanding, collaborating, participatory involvement, and we should be building up a really rich knowledge base that we can actually use against the sort of inaccuracies of the internet. And I put up one slide in my presentation which showed that the designers of the web, people like Tim Berners-Lee, are dismayed with the fragmentation, with the lack of accuracy on the web, and that they feel it's a complete failure. But we are a knowledge organization like many other knowledge organizations that could reform this area in a quite big way.
I would like to pose a question. What do you see as we've been discussing also some of the challenges. I'd like to ask, what are some of the potentials, positive potentials of adopting this technology? Besides Jonathan?
You can answer this in a lot of different ways, depending on, you know, if you're there's so many different ways to answer that question. It's, I'm not even sure where to begin. And also I feel like I'm just some guy at a bar that I think someone just asked me, hey, what do you think? I think, all right, I'll answer. There's many positive aspects of it because it engenders some collaboration between camps. And I think that's, I was saying to someone earlier that I'm a person who prefers compromise and understands that in order to do so, that is a way to move forward. And it may be iterative and messy and not perfect, but I'm kind of the belief that if both camps are unhappy, then you've succeeded in some way, because no one will be. But that pushes you just inching forward on these issues. But you could also ask that same question of the head of a museum, who might say, no, we need to make money. We are interested in getting people into the museum to sell tickets. And they are not interested in this kind of museum documentation. We need a phone app that has 4 things on it, and that's it. And it may be some audio and something that's going to make their time in a museum something they'll never forget. You know, I think sometimes we forget that there is such a wide difference of people involved in consuming what we do. It's and those people have rights. You know, that's the tricky area. That's a needle we have to thread, you know. Anyway, I'll stop rambling.
That was good.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Yeah, I can appreciate this additional sort of documentation task that you're talking about, Dominic, and how I still think we're doing the work of the 20th century while we're being faced with the work of the 21st century. Many of our institutions have enormous backlogs, and so there's not even any discovery of some of the items that we have in our collections. We have millions and millions of pieces of paper in our archives that have nothing but the most basic, collection level record to them. So how do we as a community balance that, like being able to provide access to everything that we have in our possession, at least at a rudimentary level, versus going really deep into trying to actually, enhance our documentation in the way that you're talking about?
Yes, I think we have to have new ways of working. So again, going back to my keynote, the last thing I mentioned, I had to do it really quickly because I'd run out of time. But we started a project at the National Archives in the UK, and they already had, before we even met them, they had a strategy, and it's called practitioner researcher, and it's something that someone at the Tate has written about in a book as well. And this is the idea that actually we're asking our curators who and there's less and less of them to do lots of work that means that they can't do knowledge generation research. So you'll get lots of interviews with curators saying, yeah, I used to do more research than I do now. I haven't got time to do it. Or the organization is actually saying, you have not got time to do this. We need you to do this other type of stuff, content generation or whatever it is. But actually, the people who are doing the day-to-day work are doing research. They are actually generating knowledge all the time. So if you take, for example, the people at the TNA who are doing conservation work and scientific analysis, they're doing this work and they are producing huge amounts of information. And that information is going to loads of different places in their repository. It's all fragmented. So in a way, they actually are doing all of this work, but they're recording it in an administrative database. So they're abstracting in a way that isn't useful either to them or anybody else. Yeah. And this happens in every single organization. So one way is to reorganize the way that we actually work and to provide the systems, not administrative systems, although, those, knowledge systems can have an administrative role as well. It's not, you still have to have an identification of the thing that you're working with, but you can change the way that those systems work in order to facilitate this practitioner researcher type paradigm where actually people are, as they're thinking and doing stuff and making decisions about how they treat things or the analysis they do, give them the opportunity to actually put all of that messy data into something that is much more structured. And then that's one way of doing it. What we're doing at the moment is giving them a massive overhead to put it in an administrative database and then saying, and if you want to do any thinking and record your thinking elsewhere, do it in a spreadsheet, do it in a Word document, do it over here. But make sure you put the admin data into our database. And that seems crazy to me. So that's one answer anyway.
I'd like to answer my own question. When my mom turned 70, my mom is a doctor. And I wanted to go, it was time for the pandemic, so it was challenging to go everywhere. But we were starting to go back to museums. And I know all this data about reading paintings from a medical perspective is in the database. I know. And so I asked several colleagues of mine in Dutch museums if they could give my mom a tour of the permanent collection from the medical perspective. There was nobody who could do that for various reasons. And I thought, goodness, I mean, my mom, it would have been really cool to see all of those books where they talk about whatever, including the body or including physical things, or, those portraits where people are beautifully purple or green or whatever color they are when they're half sick. But that was not possible. There's a group of colleagues in Germany, I believe, they're working on chat bots to give you tours. My ideal will be that you can choose, give me 5 topics: birds, fashion, music, I don't know, sports, maybe, current political affairs, sure. And whoever comes to the permanent collection gets to view personalized perspective of the objects. But just like that, I mean, on a physical location, we're stuck to so many paintings in so many rooms. Online, at home, no restrictions. So that will be one, to get this personalized information storytelling role of the museum based on all of the research for so long. A second dream will be, and I see that with my students, when we show them the average painting of Rembrandt, take all the Rembrandts together, the Rembrandt project, take all the Rembrandts together, make an average, and you get a male portrait with this background characteristic and so on. Yeah, is that an AI? Is that art? Sure. But the fun part is when you try to link that to the diaries, experts in linguistics, historians, and so on to make Rembrandt personified. And so when you look at the materials, then you have Rembrandt talking to you. It's bizarre, but it's cool. My university is considering bringing back to life Erasmus. Desiderius Erasmus is a wonderful philosopher, among other things. And to have him for new students coming to the university, some of them first generation, to engage with great ideas in a more accessible way. Again, access. And it's not dumbing down content. I don't believe in simplification. I do believe in the right vocabulary, the right language for the right audience. Thank God we have translators with us today to help us with one level of translation. But these levels of translation are needed beyond language, beyond Spanish and English language. There's many other languages, even among the CIDOC community, we see that sometimes we could have help with. Conceptually, we might understand each other and we might agree, but when we are communicating, sometimes we get stuck on the semantics, the use of words. Anyway, so going to my third sort of benefit or wish that I have for AI work in museums is actually more this knowledge generation and regeneration. There is a new definition of museums that invites museums to incorporate the community in the processes, including regeneration of knowledge. And we don't have yet a system to enable that. And maybe through some of these new tools, we can have not only this translating and interfacing that we need, but also have, I always call them kids because I generally work with students, but to have the general public engage with the rich and valuable jewels housed in museums to do whatever they want. If they want to make clothes, fashion is a big thing now in my university with artists, taking any content, rethinking it and creating patterns, creating, all sorts of things. But music is the other one, algorithms creating the last symphony of Beethoven, finalizing this, or so on and so forth, to play with this so that they, as you appropriate knowledge and incorporate that in your knowledge development and co-creation, then museums are somehow more part of society, or maybe society is more part of museums. Wishful thinking.
And I'd say again, so there's been a common theme to what I've been saying. I've been trying to say that actually, especially because of what's happening with computers and artificial intelligence, that and for various other reasons as well, that I think I put in my keynote, that we need to start embracing complexity, and participation is one of those areas which is complex. It requires a dialogue with people who are really not interested in what we're documenting, I'm afraid. There've been so many studies showing that when you look at people who are going onto our collections online systems, they don't use the same language. They're looking for different things than we think they're looking for. They're mostly interested in the images, not the data. And yet we continually grind it out. We grind it out all the time, and we're not looking. And do you know what happened when I started working with the CIDOC CRM? I was really surprised because I thought, wow, this is an interesting solution to this thing. I was investigating for the Mellon Foundation at the time. They wanted to do this sort of shared infrastructure type thing. And I was thinking, God, why isn't anybody using this? And when I went round, I realized that these sort of things had gone round to say, CRM, too complicated. No one will be able to use it. It'll boggle people's minds. It won't, it's not accessible. We need something simple for people. But actually, it's the complete opposite. We need actually something that actually meets the complexity of the things that people are talking about and thinking about and talk about by themselves without us. And a lot of that stuff came up in the conference this week. There were some extremely good presentations, particularly from the South American teams, which are talking about engagement, social engagement, engagement with people, which is messy and it's complicated, and it needs a framework to be able to support that. And we're not supporting that. We're not supporting it with the documentation standards that we're using today. And we're falling behind. So the big issue is perhaps not AI, it's perhaps us actually, you know, just falling by the wayside and not updating ourselves properly in the right way, and we'll just fall foul of AI simply by default. Maybe someone's got a comment on that.
Yes, great.
What I do. Oh, wait, my turn.
Sí, voy a hablar en español.
Por favor.
Sí, y yo creo que uno de los problemas de una discusión en relación a inteligencia artificial es que se cambian los niveles de lo que se está discutiendo, ¿sí? Porque si se habla cuál serían los beneficios para un museo, ¿verdad? Entonces, bueno, sí podemos llegar a conclusiones y ejemplos, pero entonces vienen argumentos de otros campos, ¿verdad? De tomar en cuenta las personas, incluso lo que sienten, y a lo que quiero llegar es que el tema es, creo, la complejidad, ¿sí? La complejidad, no solo a nivel de museos, sino la complejidad incluso en relación a los problemas que queremos que aborde la inteligencia artificial. Y vamos a hablar de problemas complejos, como el cambio climático, la pérdida de la biodiversidad, la pobreza. Y allí yo creo que todos tenemos algo que decir, aunque trabajemos en museos, ¿no? En mi caso, colecciones biológicas, bueno, pues que las especies se están extinguiendo y que de muchas especies, de aquí a 100 años o menos, lo único que vamos a saber es, ya se habrán extinguido, y lo único que vamos a conocer es lo que está en los museos. Entonces, como que esa discusión, sé que es muy compleja, ¿verdad? Pero habrá que abordarse desde allí, y la inteligencia artificial tendrá su potencial, que la verdad no sé ahorita cuál sería, pero seguro que lo tiene.
Yes. For those of you who don't have the earphones, just a summary of this last comment. AI is a general technology with a humongous application, and conversation has many levels. We are talking about apples and pears at the same time. And if I understood correctly, your point was key in this conversation is complexity. The complexity in relation to the problems that we're trying to solve with AI. And like when computers first came to our lives, we all got a computer solved with, if you press the button, everything will be solved. Just now, what do we mean by this? Once you identify the area that you want to apply it with, you might have examples, but there's many other applications or implications of the adoption of this technology. In her case, she works with the biology collection. Is that here, the Biodiversity Center? Okay. So it's very nearby, so please take a look if you can. What they notice is that they want these tools to be applied to the environmental transition. Something can be done, but we still don't know how. So that's summary, sorry, translation.
Well, I think the theme is quite complex, but I want to share my opinion as a point of curator. So what I know that we have a lot of museums which are understaffed,
and had a lot of objects. What I heard about the Finnish museum, which were trying to identify the photographs with the use of artificial intelligence, I would love to do that. We have a lot of unidentified objects, and we have no time, no resources. You know, you may have invite students, volunteers, but you have to teach them from the beginning. And this is kind of closed circle that museum workers have to do. And the job done is like very little. And with these prospects, I would love to use this tool as a tool, just to make my life easier, to give more. And I could use the information the way I want. I just would be happy if I had some kind of guide where the object comes from, or anything, a thread to go after it. And I think it is a really good thing to have as a tool for museum curators.
It's a really great comment. Thank you.
Hey.
And I'm really enjoying this conversation. And as we talk about complexity, the thing that I think about is, why do we want that complexity mediated by a computer? Because I think so much of the value of that complexity is about the relationships between humans in conversation. And having a computer mediate that or process that it would be, I don't find it helpful as we're trying to talk about the social history. That's a conversation between people. And so I want to make sure that we don't, I mean, I love computers. I work with computers all the day, but I want to make sure that the job that we're doing with that computer helps the humans that we're working with do the human thing that they want to do better. And I think helping with access or helping with discovery enables people to have new conversations. I don't need the computer to be the thing that causes the conversations. I need it to help people engage with those. And I think if we're talking about AI, I don't want my experience of art mediated by a robot. I want to have just enough that I can have the conversation with the person that I want to be having the conversation with.
Just going back to one of the slides I had in the keynote as well, which you may have noticed, was a business consultant called Peter Drucker, who operated in the 20th century, and he invented this word knowledge worker. And he had an article, and in it he said, yeah, computers are morons. And what he meant was that computers can give you all the information that you want, but actually it's humans that make judgments. And it's human experience and skills and education that are ultimately the thing that would, in his case, make companies better at what they do. But what he found was that companies wouldn't allow that. They wouldn't allow that trust. They wouldn't allow the experience and education and skills of their staff to rise above the hierarchical structures they had. So in fact, what they were still doing was operating a division of labor, a sort of Taylorist type. And in museums, we still have these very tight hierarchies, and we have a lack of ability to make judgments at sort of middle layers. All the conversations that I have that are creative and innovative and really useful are happening with people at the middle layers of museums, in web meetings where these conversations are completely isolated, because they're not conversations you can have in open public, because they're talking to the structures of their own organizations. But I think this is a key thing that we have some very skilled people working in this sector. They work in the sector because they want to, and they're motivated to do that. And I think they need to be given it may be that they need to be given or tools that help augment their work and whatever, but they also need to be given a little bit of freedom themselves to do the things that we need to do. When I say complexity, by the way, it's a relative term. So I use complexity as an alternative to what I think we're doing at the moment, which is quite simplistic. But actually, it's a complexity that we are well skilled to do. It's no way near beyond like the CIDOC CRM was never beyond anybody's ability to do. The stuff that we're talking about is not beyond the skills and experience of people working in this sector. And I think they need to be trusted a lot more.
I have a thought. I didn't consult with my board before. Oh no. Ready? What I hear from our conversation is that machines are cool. They're tools that help us advance our work. They're also challenging because of the legal, economic, this thing about ethics, this thing about propriety, like who owns what, who benefits from the exploitation of the development and so on. But we always go back to documentation. It is about documentation of knowledge within the museum framework. And how can this tool support us? Within a framework that is still supporting our mission or our vision as a heritage sector. Is it an idea to write a manifesto? My board is thinking, oh no, more work. Within Europe, there's lots of discussion about this AI legal framework and the rules and who needs to be, making decisions and so on and so forth. But as everybody said, it's extremely fragmented. Every region has its regulation and its rules and its visions and everything. I wonder if not to fragment anymore, but to bring it from our perspective. From our perspective, museums and documentalists, what is it that we need to be sure that's in place so that we can safely adopt this technology and advance our work?
Would it be anything different than what we already need, except a version for AI? I'm not sure. I think we already know what we need. We know what we need, right? But also, these needs are vastly different depending on institution, country, regional system. And I think manifesto would probably be the wrong word. Statement is fine, I think, if you're going to do that. But even you think you could argue that maybe you don't even need that. Because I fear that we might be falling into a trend before regulations are sorted out, before all of these other political issues are still highly in the weeds. That's my opinion for the moment. Yeah.
I was thinking more perhaps resolution after riding the bus with Maya, but do you want to say something?
Oh, I just had a joke. It just occurred to me. The other alternative is you carry on what we're doing and keep our records as inaccurate as possible, so that ChatGPT is always inaccurate, and then it won't work.
Yeah, I mean, I think again, I think this CIDOC has a commitment to accuracy, I think, and the growth of knowledge and expressing that through our collections already. And we can make those statements bolder, but I think they still relate to this technology regardless.
So one thing that should come out of this conference, I think, in the end, particularly from all the things that we've said and some of the presentations that have been done, we need to get a better sense of. I was talking about a new documentation. We need to get a sense of what a new documentation looks like, And I think that is in some ways a small thing to do, but also a big thing to do. And that means that we need some sort of consensus. Now, people are here looking at the definition of documentation earlier that Adele was doing, and that expansion. And we got a few comments back, and we haven't really got the feedback that we need at the moment to understand where, if you think that we're going in the right direction. But actually, that definition was about, tell me if I'm wrong, about embracing a bit more complexity in what we're doing. Someone asked, what's the difference between that and the previous one? Well, one of the differences is that the previous definition talked about documentation for objects, whereas in Adele's one, that there was a definition about how we document the world through objects. That was the big fundamental difference. And I guess that you might then say, oh my God, that's even more work that I've got to do. I've not only got to document the object, I've got to document the world as well. But there needs to be some consensus about what that means, and how we go about it, and what frameworks we use to go about it. And we've got to have, as Dennis was saying, the right tools to help us achieve that as well. And we need to have the right processes and management to be able to put that forward. Otherwise, it may well be the other world that Jonathan was talking about, where it's all about putting lights in galleries and getting visitors in and selling the tickets.
Yeah, but I was also saying that that's a part of what we're going to have to do. Just to be clear, I think that's part of the world we're going to have to address, and those people as well.
So just a sort of feel, do people feel that there is now a step change where we need to think about a more complex description of what we are doing? If you think
say yes, for those who say yes, raise your hand.
Oh, so we're talking about more complexity in order to describe more of the reality of the objects that we're looking after, and to document more of the contextual elements of those objects to make them more valuable to our audiences and our communities. So I think I was asking whether people sort of agreed with that general sort of notion. Yeah. Hands up. And people who don't think that should be the case. And then there's other people who don't know. Okay, that's an indication anyway.
So a last indication, my wild idea for more work to the board, is that something we should engage is maybe too early. In the region where I live, there's the need to have support and guidance when adopting some of these tools. And that's what I was thinking, where we could provide very general recommendations on how to go about this. But if this is too early, we can wait until the triennial and then we'll discuss it again. If you guys think that's something I need for my museum and for my management to understand what this is about and how should we engage, we could talk about it. I'm looking at the time. We have 7 minutes to close. That means we have 7 minutes to go to the bus that will take us to the Tamayo Museum, to have a guided tour. Thank you very much for your conversation, and let's continue later on.